Yesterday.
Hello everyone, welcome to Lawnstool, Germany. It's good to be here again. It's good to see everyone else through the camera, as it were. Today I'm going to talk to you about the first half of MAPS 2.0. This is a bookend presentation with the presentation I'm going to be giving tomorrow, which is the hidden gems. So just for your edification, what am I trying to get after with each of these presentations? The first part of this presentation is basically the overall approach. What is the structure that we in Europe are using specifically as our lattice work that we build the success onto? So the first half is really just going to be about the basics. What do we do? How do we do it? What are the things we will stand firm on, and what are things we'll be willing to be flexible about? The presentation tomorrow is going to be a little bit more about the details. Okay, we've got the structure in place, but really how do you land a MAPS 2.0? What are the tips and tricks? The devil's really in the details when it comes to a MAPS 2.0. There are so many places where you can absolutely be sunk. As we saw on the schedule, trying to lock in provider time can sink you. If you don't have access to providers, everything else falls in place, or falls out of place rather. So we'll talk about that piece tomorrow. So there'll really be two elements. It's a bit of a challenging presentation trying to talk about all of MAPS 2.0 without overreaching into either the other presentation tomorrow, because I really do want them to be both standalone. But we'll see how it goes, and obviously I'll get some of the feedback from you, and fortunately I'll have an opportunity this evening to take a look at a more close look at the results that we got from the scores and see if I can alter some of that for tomorrow. You may notice a couple different things on this screen. I do have the panic button in case the audio fails or we have video issues. So if I see that, I'm going to go ahead and take a pause and wait till we get the audio and video fixed. Again, we're trying some new technology here, and there's some really neat things we can do with some of this technology, but obviously there will be some growing pains, so I appreciate your patience. So let's move on with the presentation. Got about 5 goals for you today. First, let's talk about MAPS 2.0 in general across the AMED. And then specifically, I want to talk about the Europe approach. Europe's doing some unique things. Europe isn't the only way to do things, but Europe has figured some elements of it out. I would certainly give regards to Western for their approach to data and Ryan Murphy's presentation. And I certainly think there are things happening in each region that are very powerful we can all learn from. I think Southern's really stepping forward in how they're empowering the clinical champions. And I think one of the things that's very unique about Europe is how we've got this program role. So we've talked a little bit about that, as well as the philosophy. What do we think MAPS 2.0 is about? So if you agree with it or not, it'll be good to get some of this feedback as we do some of the Q&A dialogue later this hour. It says, you know, it's interesting to hear you say that, Ron, because that's not at all how we deploy MAPS 2.0 or what we thought MAPS 2.0 was about. At that point, I'm going to talk about the MAPS 2.0 playbook and our rules of the road. I gave a similar presentation at Fort Belvoir in ERMC about a month and a half ago and talked about why I think certain MAPS 2.0 succeed and others fail. And that's really going to come together and form a good part of this presentation. Again, the goal of this presentation is really just the structure. I'm not really going to get into the hows and whys of each phase. We'll talk about that tomorrow when we talk about the hidden gems and really talk about the low-hanging fruit. Additionally, you're going to see a lot of materials today. I'm going to show you various Smartbooks, various templates, various tools. I'm going to be making those available to you tomorrow. So when you tune in tomorrow, same bat time, for hidden gems of MAPS 2.0, I'm going to have some file links for you that you can right-click and download from, hopefully. So we'll see how well that works. But let's talk about the State of the Union. Colonel Kirkenbush talked about this yesterday. So for the most part, we have a MAPS 2.0 opboard that is tied to PCMH that says by the end of the fiscal year, this year we were supposed to have completed Phase 1 and Phase 2, the MAPS 2.0 across the AMED. That means primary care and all related primary care clinics like pediatrics or flight medicine. So one of the things you may have noticed on that score is one of these is not like the other. And the question is, ERMC. What is it about the ERMC approach, or what is it about living in Europe besides quality beer and a generous LQA that allows Europe to be more successful at getting after this? So certainly there's a culture in Europe that's a little bit different than some of the other regions that allows us to get away with a lot more. I won't deny that. But I'd also like to think that there's a approach that we're using that's allowing us to be successful as well. If we take a look at where we are specifically for the MAPS 2.0 schedule, I'd like you to see that we're on the home stretch. In fact, I would say that December 7th of this year, ERMC will have finished Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the MAPS 2.0 opboard. We'll have completed roughly 17 MAPS 2.0s. In fact, at this point, we're actually starting our first Phase 3 MAPS 2.0 here at Lonsdale Regional Medical Center. We're down in the pain clinic and looking at a specialty clinic, which is Phase 3. And that's really been a learning experience for us. But the value of ERMC and what I think we bring to the MAPS 2.0 isn't specifically the fact that we're getting after our schedule. I think what's unique about our approach is our results. So I'd like to take a few moments and go through some of these results. For example, here are some E&M scores that we got out of Stuttgart. I think I'm getting some feedback loop. Whoever has a microphone privilege, maybe Arlene's group or some with host privileges, if you could mute your computer. So let's take a look at Stuttgart. You're looking at a couple different charts, but really what I want you to focus in on are these green bars and these purple bars. So this is 3-4 months worth of data. Basically, it's before MAPS 2.0 and during MAPS 2.0 at Stuttgart Army Health Center. Notice the drop in 99212s and 3s as the money shifts over to the 99214s. This shows a quantitative impact that we actually affected RVUs in a clinic at Stuttgart. Let's take a look at another example. The clinic I just closed out Friday before last at Wiesbaden. Take a look at what happened with the 99212s. We had our coder on board and she said, listen, most all encounters out there are almost at a 3, but they're missing a couple critical details that could get them from a 99212 to a 99213. And using our ERMC approach, I think it's very clear that we got after that, and we got after it in a big way. We dropped their 99212s by 90%. Now, a disclaimer, this is all raw data. We got this from CHCS. To get the post-coded data, it takes a 60-day turnaround through CARA. However, we do expect that CARA will take away a good number of this data. We'll probably lose our 5s, but we would expect the dents to be equilateral across the chart. So you're still going to see a very strong shift from left to right, and I think that's going to stand the test of time. But more importantly, we're not the RVU police. We're the time to close police. Take a look at this graph. What you're looking at here, the blue lines represent percent open encounters at 4 p.m. at the Wiesbaden Army Health Clinic across a 6-week period. So before we got there, on average, 32% of their records were open at 1600, which means after their 4:30 appointment, the average provider had a third of his or her work to complete and document before he or she went home. The red line beneath that shows how many open appointments there were the next day. So starting before we got there, typically 18% of the records were open the next morning. That means 18% of the records didn't get finished the night before, and all that information the providers had to hold on to and try and remember those details. Here's the key element. Watch as we move through the deployment up until 18 July when we did our outbrief. A dramatic drop in the percent of open records. Additionally, they haven't had an open appointment the next day for a week and a half prior to us leaving. So that really shows not only are they getting today's work done today, which is a mantra of MAPS 2.0, but you saw from the previous slides, the quality of the note is there as well. I have a theory that I tell my trainers. A 99212 signed after 6 p.m. was probably a 99213. They didn't take the time to add those additional notes, those secondary diagnoses, the differential diagnoses that make that subtle difference that bump it from a 2 to a 3. This is the impact that we can bring to a MAPS 2.0. But before I move into how do we get after this, how can you replicate this type of success, first I want to establish the playing field. What do we think MAPS 2.0 is about? Here is the MAPS 2.0 philosophy. Okay? I want you to imagine a house of cards. At the bottom of this house of cards is what I call the provider trust level. So let's take a look at this philosophy and I'll explain a little bit more in depth. The ERMC MAPS 2.0 philosophy is centered around creating an environment in which documentation burdens and low-level ordering can be redistributed to support staff. This environment is created through the stabilization of provider pod units and by maximizing the culture of trust, the bottom of house of the cards, within that unit. When a provider pod is working as a true team, the provider can be left to focus on only that work which a provider can do, which will lead to more thorough, more accurate, and more timely encounter documentation. Only once that has occurred, and only once those pods are clicking on all cylinders, can training and clinical workflow initiatives be introduced to that process. And at that point, the overall clinic process health can be addressed. So this is a little bit interesting here, and you might be scratching your heads. You know, Ron's really hammering team-based documentation. ERMC didn't develop or invent team-based documentation, and more specifically, people have always had problems with making team-based documentation work. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But basically, my point is this. I've got two bookends to why this is successful. One, and I'll get into this, provider pods and stabilized infrastructure units are absolutely required before we can come into a MAPS 2.0. As a clinic moves to PCMH, the infrastructure is going to have to be in place anyway. We don't move in until that's occurred. If you can stabilize that provider pod, then and only then can the provider actually spend some time mentoring the staff. If you talk to any provider, I say, sir, ma'am, why is it that when we look, you're doing 80% of the documentation by yourself? They say, well, Ron, I have no idea who's going to walk through that door, and I have no idea what their level of education or competence is. At the end of the day, I'm the lowest common denominator of this process, and it's my credentials. I will continue to do 80% of the work, and I will continue to delete their HPI and start over in this environment. So what we do is say, okay, we are going to verify that the same person is going to walk through that door. You're going to have a stabilized provider pod. If you can do that, if we can do that, would you be willing then to spend energy on getting this provider pod up to your standards? Every provider is a mentor. They had to do it when they were going through getting their degrees, becoming doctors. What you're saying is it's okay to start educating again. You stabilize the pods, we bring them in, and now the provider can start training. I'll talk through the process of how we do that, but it's this culture of trust. If the provider trusts his or her staff, only then will the provider push some of this workload across the table to that staff. And this is very much like a Venus flytrap, again, a house of cards. The second something goes south, that provider pulls that documentation back, my documentation. And not only will I do it, I'm going to do it after 4 p.m. because that's the only time I have to do 80% of each encounter's work. So we bring in these pods, stabilize them, get the team working at a higher level, and that is the trick. Only then do we start introducing new initiatives, and only then do we start introducing training. That is the MAPS 2.0 philosophy that we live by. And if that's not the philosophy you're trying to push in, I would suggest that there may be some pros and cons to why you might not try and get after this. And I'll talk about this in a few minutes when we get to rules. But please, when you see the documentation, when you see the philosophy and the Smartbooks I'm going to introduce to you shortly, please keep in mind they're all built upon this being our mission statement. Okay. Now, what makes Europe different, in addition to good beer and generous LQA? One, we have a program. There's a MAPS 2.0 program. The lowest common denominator of every MAPS 2.0 is me, the MAPS 2.0 program manager for Europe. I feel that this allows me to learn from each project that we deploy. In my opinion, many facilities in other regions go through a Groundhog Day of not realizing what the problems are until they're too late. And then the next MTF is left to discover those potholes for themselves. I'm at every in-brief. I'm at every out-brief. I write every after-action report. I make sure that the body of knowledge, that we learn from that body of knowledge and take that information and best practices and apply it. I've done 14 straight MAPS 2.0s, and there's been a lesson learned I've applied to each and every one. Those metrics I showed you at the beginning, fairly recent. I'd say within the last 4 or 5 MAPS 2.0s have we really started to see that quantitative bump. But I guarantee you it's because of this first bullet. Strong centralized management. They've empowered us as a region. We, the region, get to decide the schedule for MAPS 2.0 deployments. And I understand that's not something that other regions can get away with. We have the ability to say, I'm sorry, Cotterbach, we are currently deploying to Grafenwehr. We're going to have to slip you 2 weeks. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to send a team down there. Additionally, our schedules are managed and funded by a central source. We never do 2 MAPS 2.0s in a row. We always bring resources to bear. I just left Wiesbaden. Wiesbaden has 2 clinical system trainers. I brought 5 others from clinical system trainer sites around the region. We funded those TDYs. Bringing people in from SHAPE, bringing people up from Vicenza, bringing all these additional resources to a clinic. It's not cheap, but if you want to achieve critical mass, you can't do it with just 2 trainers. Our ability to have a regionally funded program, and I'll talk later about where that money came from and how that success can be replicated, is critical to our success. Additionally, we have an increasingly prescriptive deployment approach. It used to be we would show up and train and we'd step back and say, okay, self-actualize, be yourself, but be better. It doesn't always work. We'd walk into facilities, they're like, okay, where's our checklist? What do we need to do? And our answer was, well, no, we want to see what you're doing and just want to tailor your needs and make you better. And they'd look at me like I had 10 heads. So what we found going from MAPS 2.0 to MAPS 2.0 for primary care is there are some ways to do things right. Now, this isn't to say we have to force our template, but we come in with examples of how we think the front desk should operate. Documented workflows on how the screening should work. Documented workflows on what goes in the T-SWIFT, where to use the MDET. We have sample macros that we bring in. Additionally, when I talk to the command, I have sample metrics I think they can get after. We come in more and more with what I think right looks like right off the bat. We bring them in, and certainly, absolutely, if they prefer or there's advantages to that clinic, we focus on that workflow. But I'll tell you guys, more times than not, they'll sit there and say, what does the answer look like? And if you tell them, no, we need you to figure out the answer, we're just going to document it, it's a no-go. So our increasingly prescriptive approach has been a big win. Additionally, and I mentioned this earlier, we've added a formalized team coaching phase into the MAPS 2.0 deployment. You'll see that when I get to the plan in the next slide. But basically, for our first week of MAPS 2.0, we do no training. In fact, for our first week of MAPS 2.0, we do hardly any talking. We go, we observe. We have 60-minute appointments for the providers. They have 20-minute slots. And what we try and do is facilitate conversations. We say, sir, ma'am, you're the provider. This is your team. We try and create some synergy in the team. We talk about, this is what we saw. And then we ask them questions. Why is it that you do certain things? Provider, we've noticed that you rarely keep the HPI that your support staff documented. Why is that? We ask questions. Then we get to the support staff, they get them talking. This is a big element, and I'll go into this a bit more in tomorrow's session. But really, the formalized team coaching phase is a huge step here. We also lead in with metrics. I do a metric review twice a day. Metrics aren't just going to happen. You've got to drive them. You saw earlier, I have a very unique take on time to close. Your historical time to close is 24 hours, 48 hours is 72 hours. My time to close is 4 p.m. that day. Now, I'm not saying they have to be closed, but I say time to close isn't everything, but it's a symptom of everything. When we come to a meeting at 4 p.m. and they've got 30% of their appointments open, we step back and say, where did the process let you down? Where was your support staff not able to help you that you weren't able to close those encounters? And again, I don't mind them being closed. I just need to make sure they could have been closed. And that's really the key element here, proof of concept that this can happen. We'll talk about time to close metrics a little bit later, but do keep in mind what I mentioned. I have a very unique take on it. Additionally, we also leave with sustainment plan, and we leave them with sustainment tools. I'll show you examples of these tools tomorrow, but the fact is I put a plan in the commanding officer's hand that says, this is where you are right now, and this is how you can quantitatively verify that you're going to have success. So let's take a look at this approach. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail because, again, I'm not trying to push my approach on you. Some of these lessons here will apply regardless of your approach. But really, I want you guys to focus on that central phase of team coaching. That's probably not something you've had before. So from left to right, pre-deployment phase lasts about 8 weeks, give or take. This is before the MAPS 2.0 starts. That's probably not a new concept to you. We have a kickoff. I think the kickoff is important for several reasons. One, we have our own kickoff. The day before our MAPS 2.0, I have all the training assets together, and for 8 hours we go through the plan, we go through the assignments, we go through the schedule, we talk about what is specific about the culture of this clinic, and we really make sure we're on the same page. We spend 8 full hours doing that. That's an absolute rule of mine. You have to get together before we get pushed out in front of the command. The kickoff, the key element in that kickoff is absolutely having command presence. I'll talk about the importance of that, but truly, regardless of whatever is said, spoken or unspoken during a kickoff, as long as you have the command there and the staff sees that you're there with the command, they're going to show you that this is important to them as well. It's a key element. The team coaching phase is a key concept. For me, this is everything. That 1 week we spend talking to the teams about what their roles are and making sure those teams are stabilized is everything for us. From there, we have a yin-yang in the final 2 weeks of training and workflow. And then, truth be told, during our 4th week sustainment, our goal is to do nothing. They're back to 20-minute appointments. I'll show you that time in the time slides in a few seconds as well. But really, one of the rules for me is the last week I want to change nothing. This is the time for muscle memory to set in. The hardest part of any cultural change is the unlearning phase. So at this point, you have to believe they know what right looks like, but it's going to take time for this to become part of their daily battle rhythm. And that's why we have a formalized sustainment week, which starts a week before we leave. So I think you're going to find that unique as well. Again, the ERMC approach, this will put a little bit more into context, and it's not as visible as I'd like it to be, but the concept is this. During week 1, the clinic has 60-minute appointments with 20-minute slots. During week 2, 40 minutes, week 3, 30 minutes, and then during week 4, they're down to 20 minutes. Some of you are saying, oh my God, Ron, you just blocked 2/3 of their access to care during week 1. Yes, I did. I think unless you have time to get in there to make a difference, there's nothing else. Nothing's going to stick. Training is paramount. The ability to go through and have access to these schedules is absolutely critical for me. The results we've had from our team during week 1 where we're focusing on the team coaching, this is the most important part of any MAPS 2.0. If we never get to week 2, training, week 3, workflow, week 4, sustainment, that clinic will be a better place if they get through week 1 and give it the time it deserves. Because really what happens after the first day or two, when we've had these team-based documentation discussions, They've got 20 minutes in his 60-minute appointments, and sure, that 20 will probably expand to 25 or 30. But that's 30 minutes for that provider pod to start taking over and start mentoring each other. The providers say, good job, I'd like you to present the patient like this, or good job on the HPI, but make sure you talk about duration. That's the magic. Anytime a CWA or a trainer can step away from the clinic and that clinic has momentum to continue improving on their own, that's the magic hour. We get after that day one, week one of a MAPS 2.0 with this team synergy. So I think you'll see the value of that schedule. So let's get into the heart of the presentation. I have 10 tips for you. These are Ron's MAPS 2.0 rules of the road. I think a majority of these are scalable, and I think a majority of these are things you're going to hear. And 1 second, let me reset the poll, make sure the audio is good. How are we on audio check? Okay, good. I don't see any stops or video checks. So 10 steps here. 1, when to say no to a MAPS 2.0 project. I think the biggest reason many MAPS 2.0s fail is because you should never have been there in the first place. This is my most important rule. This is the rule I fought hardest to keep. I think this is the rule that sets the good MAPS 2.0s away from the bad MAPS 2.0s. Here are 4 telltale signs for me when to say no to a MAPS 2.0. 1, those provider pods aren't stabilized. If you go in there and they don't have the infrastructure in place, there's nothing you can do. You're spitting on a river if you're trying to go through and do workflow or do training, and you've got a revolving door of medics and nurses. So obvious question, well, Ron, what if they don't have the support staff? You very kindly say, no, but we'll come back. Here's the magic trick about this. They're all going to PCMH, right? A requirement of PCMH is the staffing infrastructure, right? So just wait. Just wait. If that MTF wants to jump on a MAPS 2.0 before those provider pods are stabilized, you're wasting your time, guys. It's not going to happen. Only if they've got a stable pod can we start opening up this Venus flytrap, which is the provider and this culture of trust. If you want to get the documentation ratio from 80% provider to 20% support staff over to 50-50, you have to have a stabilized pod in place. If you guys remember nothing else from this presentation, do not go into and do not agree to do a MAPS 2.0 unless the staffing infrastructure is in place. Second element of this, schedules aren't blocked. Ron, we love what you're doing. We've seen the graphics. We've talked to the clinic commanders. You guys have really done some magic. But you know what? We just can't block the access to care. How about we try and do 20-minute appointments and make the training just happen? It doesn't happen. If schedules aren't blocked, if you don't have that, you're not going to be able to get there and then make the changes. 60-minute appointments for the first week, it's rough. When I get into tomorrow's presentation on gems of MAPS 2.0, I'll show you examples of how to set the expectations. We've had clinics put letters in the newspaper. Here in Europe, we have the Armed Forces Network, AFN. They do TV spots. I'll show you some TV commercials that let the public know what to expect during the first 2 weeks, but it's critical. If the clinic is not willing to block schedules for you, don't waste your time, guys. Training's not going to happen just between appointments. You need the bandwidth to get in there to make an impact. More than anything, these 60-minute appointments aren't necessarily even about you. It's about what we call a tactical pause, a chance for the clinic to stop, take a breath. One of the epiphanies I found during many MAPS 2.0s is the fact that the clinics know what's wrong. That's the Greek tragedy in many of these clinics. They're completely viscerally aware of why they're broken, but they've never had the time to get after it. These 60-minute appointments are often just as much a chance for them to say, listen, let's stop the insanity and get back to it. If they're not willing to block the schedules, no go. Additionally, if they're not willing to do a morning huddle, no go. You have to have that opportunity to do a communication with them, and they have to have the ability to communicate with each other. If you're not going to be able to do a clinic huddle, they're certainly not going to go for the provider-specific huddles, which are supposed to happen after that. In my opinion, those are the most important parts of their day. A chance to synchronize their watches and make sure they're on the same page. I tell you, you're not going to get a 50% documentation change, and you're certainly not going to get 80% of their records closed by 4 p.m. unless they have this clinic huddle to synchronize with each other. It's not going to happen. Additionally, when to say no. The final step of this, if the commander does not have quantifiable goals. If I had $1, or euro rather, for every time a commander said, listen, we just want to get PCMH ready, come do your thing. It's not going to happen. MAPS 2.0 isn't a process. It's an intervention. The goal of MAPS 2.0 is to set a clinic on a new course. You need to know what that new course is specifically, and it's not just about being the PCMH checkbox team. You need to talk to them about what are your pain points. Is it maybe your group practice manager? Is your empanelment low? Are you having problems? Is your templating all over the place? Is the front desk a problem? Are you trying to improve morale? Is it the fact that the staff hasn't been trained enough and they can't do their job effectively? We can get after all of those things and set templates in place and set training in place and focus on, okay, for this MAPS 2.0, we need to make sure that the medics can do a screening vitals in under 12 minutes. That's our only goal. That's fine. But until we hear it from the clinic commander, we don't know. I'm going to show you tomorrow what I call my metrics of buffet. I've got 10 different metrics a MAPS 2.0 can support, but they can't support all 10. We have 4 weeks, a limited focus, laser beam attention to get after things. The clinic commander has to tell you what they want. Additionally, if the clinic commander doesn't have quantifiable goals, for me, that's symptomatic of a larger problem. That's symptomatic of a clinic that's not ready to undergo transformation. That's symptomatic of a clinic that's just trying to get from point A to point B. And folks, that's a very different thing. So if the commander doesn't come in and say, Ron, so glad you're here. We've been counting down the days for you and your team. Here's what I'm trying to get after. Throw up red flags. I remember I had the honor to work with Colonel Melton at Bamberg. Kevin Scott was the lead on that one. We went in. I said, sir, I can't help but notice that the clinic looks a little bare. And Colonel Melton said to me, Ron, I told them to take down every poster and every sign. And I told them that only those signs that support our new workflow are going to go back up on the walls. I stood back and said, sir, yes, sir. You've got a commander willing to step in and say, we're going to make a direction, and I want the clinic to physically look different. That's when you know you can have a good MAPS 2.0. So if they don't have the goals, let alone be willing to make those types of statements, you're going to have a problem on your hands. So that's my number one goal, knowing when to say no. I can hear you guys sending me messages through the screen. Ron, what if they say yes and we can't say no? This gets back to why Europe is unique and the fact that we do have regional top cover. I've had Mark Webb in my corner. Mark Webb, I just told Vilsec Clinic that we're not going to do a MAPS 2.0 and I don't think they're ready for it. Please give me the top cover I need to support. And we went 3-4 months later, we went back and handled Vilsec, and they were ready, and we had a successful MAPS 2.0, and they were appreciative for it. But knowing when to say no is the biggest element. So, my second rule of the road for you, document everything. So, what I'd like to do now is I'm going to button away. Okay, going back to full screen. Shifting over. Okay. So this is the MAPS 2.0 Smartbook. What you're looking at here is a OneNote book. For me, this is my Bible. Every piece of information I've learned in a MAPS 2.0, I put in this book. Guys, you'll see a full screen button. If you would go ahead and press that full screen button, that will maximize the full screen on your screens as well. I just want to step through this. Again, what I'm getting after here is rule number 2, which is document everything. This Smartbook has my high-level information, big nice welcome screen. It's got a table of contents, and which is visible about now. Every piece of information that one would want to know about a MAPS 2.0 I put in here. This is a living, breathing document. I come back and I revisit this, I would say, on a daily basis. The document's broken into 6 phases. And if we go back to the welcome screen, you'll see the purpose of each of these phases. It's designed to start at the 50,000-foot level at the far left, and it gradually moves from overview to philosophy to actual working instructions as I go from MAPS philosophy down to tips and tricks, which is the orange tab on the far right. If at any time you'd like more generic information, you just go to the left. So this first page is basically a welcome page. I've also got something in here that says, hey, here's MAPS 2.0 in, what is a MAPS 2.0? And waiting for it to pop on your screen. There it goes. This is the elevator speech of MAPS 2.0. Very simple. From there, we can move to guides. And this is more, here are my lessons learned, as well as what to expect when expecting a MAPS 2.0. So additionally, let's keep moving. I've got the training tab. If you look on the left-hand side, and let me zoom in here. And there's the zoom. There's every training class I would need to give during a MAPS 2.0. And I keep adding information to this. Additionally, take a look at what's above this page. Do you see where it says Bamberg, Baumholder, Coleman, Illesheim, Kleber? Each of those are the project-specific details. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hop over to the one I just completed at Wiesbaden. And it's going to take a few seconds for you guys to catch up. So I had a whiteboard. Every day I took a picture of that whiteboard. So what you're looking at is the notes for week 1, day 2. Here's week 1, day 3. Week 2, day 2. I document every little thing. Additionally, I've got some summary information here that talks about the overall staffing, as well as what we were trying to accomplish in Wiesbaden specifically. Let's see, coding tips. Here's a good one. Here are the notes on, I documented this while at Wiesbaden. Hey Ron, how can I continue to improve MAPS 2.0? And these are the notes I documented. So the point is, document everything you can. Just like we're asking the providers to do, you can only document when it's fresh in your mind. The rules of the road are, if you don't have time to document, you're not going to learn and you're not going to remember. Okay, so I'm jumping back to my slide deck. Great. Okay, so that's rule 2. Rule 3. Be prescriptive whenever possible. I mentioned this wherever possible. I mentioned this. Let me switch over to camera mode. I mentioned this at the beginning, but I think it's critical that lead in with examples. They don't like this idea ideas. Use whatever processes you have. Providers, you will get more, for no other reason, you'll get more street cred if you come in with some solutions in a toolkit of ideas. It'll show them that you really do know what you're doing. One of the toughest things about getting after culture is getting them in a position that they want to listen to you, that they feel you're worth listening to. Coming in with some prescriptive approaches, even if they throw all of them right out the window, is critical to earning that integrity. 4, have a strong clinical voice inside the clinic. You've got to have someone on the inside. You're all viewed as outsiders. The ability to go through and have an advocate inside can't be understated, and I think this is an obvious one for you. Here's an element you might not have thought of. Bob Walker talks about something called learned helplessness. I think it's truly it's truly powerful to see providers in this state. When you've got providers who don't have a stabilized pod, they feel they're at the mercy of the process and there's nothing they can do. They can't train their team because their team swaps out. They can't try and make a process change because it gets crushed by the front desk's lack of process. Empowering providers, as silly as it sounds, is often the most important step to start a MAPS 2.0. Telling the provider, sir, ma'am, this is your clinic. What do you want to do? And let us make that happen. This was really surprising. It's not something I pushed out in the early MAPS 2.0s, but having the conversation where we sit down and tell the providers, take control back. It's really been an epiphany for me how well received that was. Number 5, as powerful as providers are, those NCOs and those nurses, do not leave them out of the equation. I've made mistakes of coming in and being too provider specific. When you say MAPS is about provider satisfaction, you know that alienates a good number of your staff members. They said, Ron, my only job is to carry the weight to make them look good. That's not going to be powerful. So communicate specifically with your NCOs and nurses, and wherever possible, elevate them. Call them out at a meeting that they're doing a good job, that they're the linchpin in a process. Make sure they feel empowered as well. It really is a subtle difference, but when you go into a meeting and say, listen, this is the NCO's process, I'm merely training it, or this is the nurse's process that we want to implement, and make sure they get the credit and they get the empowerment. It's really going to bring that team together. Let's see. Let's move through here. I've talked about being prescriptive. A little bit differences here. Meet with your staff 3 times a day. It seems silly, but when I do a MAPS 2.0, I talk with my staff at 7 a.m., I talk with my staff at 11 a.m. and after the huddle. Time is your most precious commodity during a MAPS 2.0. We only have 5 shopping days of 60-minute appointments. You cannot wait for anything to go wrong. If there's an issue, you need to get after it immediately. This is a huge element that's often overlooked. Talk with your team about where are we. You see the whiteboard examples from Wiesbaden. What are our goals today? Where are we with team-based documentation? Where are we with the need to push out some AgIType macros? Who's pushing back on the front desk? Those decisions and the ability for you to work with your team consistently are absolutely critical. I've seen some MAPS 2.0s where they might talk once a day. If you want to make a change, you have to be as aggressive as possible. And if you meet 3 times a day, I tell you, that team will know that you're serious about this. And make sure, as the project or program manager, you come equipped. You know what you need to talk about at each of those meetings. Often what I do during the 7 a.m. meeting is, who's working with Dr. Lukasik? Would you find out why Dr. Lukasik was unable to close 12 of his appointments yesterday? Don't make him feel threatened. Just say, you know, where could the process have helped you? Did he get some complicated appointments? That's fine. Or was it the fact that the nurse was out or someone got pulled to be a duty driver? We need to get after those things. And then at 11 a.m. we talk about it. And then after the huddle we talk about what went well and the feedback we got from the clinic. So communication is absolutely critical. Also, you have to make sure you stick to your game plan. You plan the execution and then you execute that plan. But with a caveat, don't fall in love with the plan. You might need to make some alterations. One of the biggest problems I see with plans is the fact that they shoot for the moon. You have to keep scope in mind. If you bring in a clinical workflow analyst and they're talking about, okay, we're going to completely redesign the call center, you don't have time to get after that. Again, with a 4-week MAPS 2.0, my goal for you is that you're done in 3 weeks, because that last week is sustainment. And truly, I want you done in 2 weeks, because that 3rd week, I really want you to start training that workflow. I've got a saying in my MAPS 2.0 that something 8/10 deployed is 100% failed. I said earlier my goal was to achieve escape velocity. If that workflow isn't in place, trained, practiced before you leave the end of week 4, I tell you, it's just going to fall back. It's going to come crashing back to earth. The devil you know is better than the one you don't, and they're going to go back to their previous ways. So make sure you spend time on that. Metrics, metrics, metrics. I'm going to talk more about this tomorrow when we actually get into the specific metrics. But really, unless you're talking, I talk about tracking metrics into submission. Unless you're talking about where are we with time to close or where are we with coding feedback every day, you're not going to see that change. I was like many of you. During my first 5, 6, 7 MAPS 2.0s, I thought that if we did our job well enough, the metrics would happen. That's not a true statement. That which goes unchecked goes undone. You have to push those metrics. And I announce at every afternoon huddle, guys, you saw 42 patients today. Right now, you've got 15 open appointments, but keep in mind it's not the end of the day. Just want to see where we are. I'm not concerned about the 15 open appointments, but I just want to see what that says about our process. My goal as we move through this is eventually out of 42, you might have 8 open. All I'm concerned about is the trend. And I specifically do it at 4 o'clock because that's when the huddle is, even though I know many of the providers won't be done until 4:30. I don't want 0. I just want a positive trend. And you saw that. We didn't get down to 0, but we got moving in the right direction. 9. The teams. As much as I want our MAPS 2.0s to be process-driven, and you can see from my Smartbook, we're really getting after that. It's really currently about those heroes. It's about having the right people. When I pull together a MAPS 2.0 team, I look at a number of things, and it's not just who's available, but really about what are the skills I need. For this clinic, are they having problems with HEDIS? Then I need to bring a trainer who knows CarePoint. Did they get a brand new group practice manager? I need someone who understands metrics and PCMH and empanelment. Are they having problems with templating? Maybe I'll bring in a CHS booker. And also, and this is very interesting, you saw that during week 1 I talk about team coaching. I specifically bring trainers in during week 1 that are good at team coaching. This is not a skill set every trainer has or wants to have. The ability to go through and shake up a clinic and to talk to a provider and say, grab them by the stethoscope and says, this is your clinic, and try and facilitate these Dr. Phil moments between the pods. It's just not something everyone gets after. So I bring in trainers for week 1. I shake their hand and say thank you very much, and then I bring in many times different trainers for week 2 to do more of the core training. It keeps my budget down, but also matches up my skill sets. The final piece. The hardest part about culture change, which I mentioned earlier, is making sure they're willing to accept you and what you have to say. The clinic commander is always willing to step in and say, Ron, whatever you need, I'll drop the hammer. But you have to be very, very careful. It's an us-them mentality when you walk in. And sometimes, guys, it's better to take the hits on the chin to jeopardize the ability of creating space between you, your team, and the clinic. When we go in, another good reason to lead with team coaching is because you do a lot of listening and a lot of evaluating. You don't come in with your perfect now change. You make sure you're aware and you make sure they feel heard. If you want to make cultural change, it starts with your ability to be listened to. During this whole week, this is a critical element, and it really comes down to step 10 here, which is doing everything you can to make sure they're aware. You're not from the outside world. You're a clinical system trainer. Many of these folks were medical. They're here. We're here to help you. Okay? So those are my top 10 goals. I've got some more elements, and the phases which I reviewed are more for tomorrow. But in review, before I move on to the administrative piece, we're doing some unique things in Europe, and I hope you've taken my rules and our philosophy with a grain of salt with what you guys can get after. But I truly think, as you saw from some of our successes, there's things and ways that the regions can improve. There's things you can demand from your region. I demand more regional control. I demand some more regional support on this. I really think the ability to grow and learn is dependent upon your ability to take information from one project to the next. We talked about the providers being a house of cards with trust. I think for us, for trainers like myself and yourself, this is also a critical step. You have to trust that those regions are looking out for your best interest and they're putting you in a place to succeed. We don't want those clinics to view this as a checkbox, and I certainly don't want the regions to view us as the means to that checkbox. Okay. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about the structure. I showed you the phases, we talked about it, but tomorrow I'm going to talk about the tips and tricks along the way to make this work. And I'm also going to give you a lot of documents. I'll give you access to everything I've shown you today, plus several other things. And we'll really talk about how to show value. So again, a lot of tomorrow's success will be if you bought what I had to say today. And I understand some of this might be new for you guys. Sorry, I know the audio cut off there as we switch screens. Please go through and fill out the survey. And please notice you can scroll up or scroll down with the survey. If there are any questions you didn't have time to enter, please go through and click that web link. But again, tomorrow we're going to talk about the gems of this. So I look forward to talking with you guys tomorrow more about the details. And again, send me questions. You can send them to Ronald Yaw. And also specifically, I'm going to take a look at some of the results we had here as well as during the earlier surveys and see if I can customize that a little bit more for you guys tomorrow. Again, thanks for your time.